Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making a Latin house song inspired by Dennis Cruz's song, Bonito. And we're going to find out if we can do this in 5 to 6 hours of in-studio time by using the 80-20 rule of Latin house music production. What you're listening to right now is the song we'll be working on. And what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, we're going to build things out in the order that I actually created it, so you can follow along as you're building out songs like this. So we'll start by going over the drums, then over the bass, then over the all the melodic elements like the synths and the vocals, and then finally doing a mix and a master. So make sure you stay around to the end of the video. We'll be doing a nice overview of the 80-20 rule so that you can finish songs faster, just like this. Because all in all, this song took me about 6 hours to complete. As you can see, it's mixed, mastered, arranged, completely ready to go. So if you want help finishing songs faster as well, I've also made you a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song like this every single week. Just visit the link that's on the screen now or in the description to grab the ultimate song finishing toolkit for free. And if you'd like to take things to the next level, you can also find a link for this video's project files in the description as well. So with that said, let's jump into this. Alright. So for this one, when it comes to kind of this like Latin infused tech house kind of drums, the main thing is that it's basically just standard house drums. Sometimes the kick is mixed a little quieter, I would say, and then it's like layering on a lot of like really cool Latin percussion. So that said, let's start off with the kick. And the main kick that I'm using here is this RPS kick from Rocket Powered Sounds. So shout out to them for sponsoring this video, as well as hooking up the community. So anyone who is part of the membership will get this. Let's reset that. That's a little bit too salesy. Alright. So when it comes to kind of this like Latin infused house drums, the main thing is it's more or less just house drums. With, I would say sometimes the kick is layered a little bit quieter in the mix, and some of the sample selections is maybe a little bit different, maybe more organic sounds, as well as then just like layering on really cool like Latin percussion. So let's dive into this. The main thing right off the bat is that I do have Dennis Cruz's song Bonito right here in the project file, and I've set it up so when I press the S key, I can flick back and forth between what I have and what they have. The first thing with the kick, and with any of this really, is first to pick a good sample that sounds similar to what you're referencing, and then set the right volumes. So the way that I went about this is a little bit different. So what I actually did was over here in the intro section of Dennis Cruz's song, I grabbed a kick drum, and then I dropped that into what I created here, this thing called R kick. So basically extracting the kick from the actual reference track, making some slight adjustments, adjusting the filter envelope, bringing the filter frequency down, bringing up the volume to velocity a bit. I think I might have played a little bit around with attack, decay, sustain, and release, just to kind of get the kick isolated as well as possible. Then what I did was I actually froze it, as you can see here, then cut it up that freeze, and then I've been playing with Ableton 12's sample similar sound file. And so this is really cool. So what I did after that is I clicked it, and then I said show in browser, like this. And then from there, that frozen file is right there, and you can actually click like this, and then get a bunch of similar sounds. And basically just went through that process, and then ended up with the kick that you're hearing now. So this is a cool way that you can extract and isolate the kick from a song, but then replace it with a higher quality sample from your library that sounds similar. And so what I ended up with, let's just get back to the area that we need to be in, which is over here. What I ended up with is this sample here, RPS Miss Kick, which is from Rocket Powered Sounds. Shout out to them for actually sponsoring this video and hooking up anyone who downloads the project files. You'll be able to use their samples that I have put in this video, which is great. Other than that, the only processing that's going on with the kick, I usually try to keep it pretty like nothing going on. I just have this channel EQ where I'm bringing down the lows like the end here, more of as an arrangement trick more than anything. So really that's kind of the main thing. Getting a solid kick is going to be super important, so take your time finding the right samples, flicking back and forth between this and what you have. Really focusing on the kick as you do this. Trying to find a similar sound and a similar energy level, and just really the main thing here is getting the volumes correct. When you get the volumes correct, that's that 80-20 rule right there, really. So then the next thing after that I added in was these snares. So let's take a look and listen to the snares. So different for sure. Maybe this is like kind of a Latin cool vibe or something like that. I'm not familiar with what this pattern might be, but it's like a little bit different. So it's like mostly on the 2 and the 4, like normal snares, but there's also this kind of little flam bit. So it's like something playing right just before it kind of adds that, like, it's called the flam, I believe, like kind of like a little roll there. So it's a little bit different. It's cool. It's very interesting. Take a look at the pattern there where we created if you'd like to. Then in terms of the samples, I'm using PIV DGK, another one from Rocket Powered Sounds, the Picking Sides perk, and then this other one, SMT. I don't even know where that's from, to be honest. Just layered on a couple different snare sounds, kind of going for that like organic-y sound, I would say. And then again, main thing is listening to and then ours. I feel like even our snares might even be a little too loud, so I'd probably just bring that down just a little bit here, just to get those volumes right. Because again, the volumes, picking the right sounds, making sure that the notes are hitting the right place, and then the volumes is really the main thing. Then under that, running into the standard channel strip that I have, so just removing a bunch of the lows, and then adding a little bit of Ableton saturation here, just to add more like fullness to the sound and a bit of grit. Next up is the hi-hat, so let's take a look and listen to that. So main thing here is, I wonder if I did anything crazy. No. So basically it's just on like that offbeat standard kind of hat or open hi-hat kind of position. The only thing I've done is, like, if you have a look at the velocities, it's just like it's not even every other note. There's just like a slight change. I added a little bit of groove that I could kind of hear in the track. So again, very slight, but you can see here the main thing is picking the right sample and then getting the volume right. Because other than that, if we have a look at any of the processing here, what do we have going on here? Standard channel strip stuff. So removing a bunch of the lows, and then some of just one knob of Ableton saturation to fill out the sound a little bit. So then let's move over to the open hi-hat. Let's have a look and listen. So same pattern, same placement as the hi-hat. In this case, mostly just using like a kind of a shaker sound, which I feel like is kind of layered in the actual track. There's no traditional open hi-hat. So just layered in a shaker sound, and then run the volume slightly, and then, yeah, this one's mixed in quite a bit compared to the other hi-hat. And then we're just removing a whole bunch of the lows here, shelving out a little bit of the highs to kind of like mix it in a bit. So it's kind of blending in with the rest of the track. And then that's really it. Again, volumes is kind of the main thing. And then at that point, I moved on to, usually once I get like kind of the core sounds down, so like the kick, the snare, the hats, open hats, then I like to usually add in top loops to add some vibe and character. And that's a really big part of this sound, I would say, because it's going to be hard to program in really humanized sounding cool like bongos and shakers and stuff like that. So I feel like finding good loops is important. So with that said, let's have a listen and look at the first loop that I ended up adding. Hear that shaker. So some processing I did do is like in the clip, set to beats, changing the warp to the arrow pointing to the right, and then dragging down this value here kind of tightens up the sound a little bit, helps it blend in with the rest of the core sounds that you have going on. Listening to the reference track for a second, you can hear some kind of shakers. I think mine's mixed a bit louder, but I liked how it sounded. This is definitely a part where you can start deviating from the reference track that you have, because you don't want to, in my opinion, you don't want to just a full carbon copy. You want it to start to take on its own identity, so you could actually use it as a track. At least that's my approach to it. So once that is in there, we're just doing a little bit of the standard channel strip stuff. So this is just automatic. I set it so it's automatically removing some of the 200, so it just makes moves easier. You can see it's not really doing anything because the sample's already been, has a lot of the lows removed. But then what we are doing is I'm running this into this transient shaper. So this is the Free Kill Hearts transient shaper. I've just mapped the crucial controls to an Ableton rack, so it's just a lot easier to make moves real quick. So just bringing down some of the stain to kind of tighten up that sound a little bit more. Then we have this rack here where I've combined sidechain with saturation. So it's just a one knob shaper device, Max for Live, going to quarter notes and then just ducking volume utility. So that way it's easy to do one knob to easily get that kind of pumping effect that can be cool and groovy and dancey, and then also make room for the kick and the bass, which is super important. And you don't have to do any kind of like sidechain and routing and all that stuff every time. It's just drag up the knob to taste and then you move on. So I like that workflow. And then just Ableton Saturator, same thing, making it quick access. And it also makes it so you're kind of using your ears a bit more than your eyes, which I think can be really useful. So just adding in a bunch of saturation here to kind of fill out the sound a little bit. We're not using the width, but we'll get into that. I'm sure at some point we'll be adding that in. So let's move on to the next track, which is this top loop here. And it's subtle, so I'm also going to bring the volume up for a moment so you can really zone in on it. And then I'm going to bring it back down to where it was nestled in. So you can see, very subtle. It's just adding a bit of extra energy and vibe and character to the loop. But it's not at all a core sound that's like mixed really loud or anything like that. So let's take a look, see if I did anything crazy. So again, I tightened up the transients quite a bit more. Helps it nestle into the rest of the loop a bunch, I would say. And then standard channel strip stuff, just cutting off the lows where it needs to be cut off normally. A little bit of one knob sidechain, a little bit of one knob saturation, and then we're doing a little bit of this width plugin, which is another free plugin called Wider. And I've just, again, attached the core like knobs to this rack so I don't have to open up VSTs and load the VSTs and all that. Like this strip comes in every time. Should mention, if you grab the project files, you can grab all these things, of course. And what we're doing here is, with the width, kind of just pushing this sound to the left and right, making it a bit more stereo. And then also while doing that, it can kind of free up the center so that like the core sounds that are pan center are, you know, that's the area they're taking up. It's more prominent, and you're leaving space for it to do that instead of having things kind of clashing. With that said, let's move on to the next loop that was added, which is going to get more fun and bongo-y, I think. I'm going to bring up the volume. And then I'm going to bring it back down. So let's have a look, see if I did anything. Okay, just left this one preserved as is. No like transient changing there, at least on the clip. Let's have a look. Removing some of the lows here, a little bit of one knob sidechain, a little bit of one knob saturation. And this time I use this Wider plugin's ability to not just make things stereo, but also bring things in a little bit. So in this case, I wanted this sound to be a bit more center. Other than that, running into this auto filter. And what this auto filter is doing is I've automated the envelope so that it's slowly changing how this filter is reacting. So it's kind of changing the sound of it a little bit over time. So it's just set to 16th. So it's in time with the song and it's slowly adjusting the envelope. So when a transient hits, it's going to move the filter position like up or down, depending on where this value is. And so it's just adding some movement essentially is what's going on here. It's very subtle, very, very, very subtle. Let's move on to the next loop, which is this one right here. So fucking cool. This one is clearly louder. It's a lot more of the vibe. So less subtle. Let's take a look, see if we did anything crazy here. Nope, it's all good. So just found some cool, like, I think I just looked up Latin drums on Splice, to be completely honest. And let's take a look. So again, standard channel strip behavior here going on, removing a bunch of the lows, making room for the kick and the bass so that all the lows is taken care of from that. Nothing's too conflicted or anything like that, or frequency overlap and that kind of stuff. We're avoiding that. Then we're just doing some one-up sidechain to get a little bit of a pumping vibe. And then I think at this point it could be a good idea to flick back and forth for the reference. So it's definitely starting to move in a different direction. But as it's doing that, it's still a good idea to somewhat keep some idea of the balance of how yours is turning out to the reference track. Definitely a lot more important getting those core elements down, and then I think adding like top loops and stuff is where you could really deviate and make your track unique, and add an extra character and yeah, take a new direction. With that said, let's keep moving on to the next loop that's been added, which is this. More subtle, so I'll bring up the volume. Another freaking really cool, like Latin-y kind of sounding loop. Let's take a look to see if I did anything funky. No, so all good. So let's move into the track processing. So for this one, standard channel strip stuff again, just removing some of the lows, a bit of sidechain for pumping, and that's about it. One thing you could also notice too is we have these two different bongo loops. This first one is panned a little to the left, this other one's panned a little bit to the right. So just trying to add some kind of like, use the space in our track a bit, or in our song a bit. So that's it, super simple stuff. So let's look over to the next one, which is this. Bring up the volume a little for you. Cool, so just another cool shaker loop. I think if we look, yeah, so that's just another shaker loop. I cut it up a little bit because I think the original one was, I don't know, it just kind of started deviating and sounding all weird and too loose. So I just kind of cut it up a little bit so it sounds a little bit more consistent and just kind of grooves in a way that I liked a little bit more. This one's panned hard to the left. I don't know why, I just wanted to, I guess. I don't know if there's a shaker in the... No, if anything I hear a shaker on the right side, but so that's just what I decided to do. And then standard channel strip, we're moving a bunch of the lows, which is an automatic move because you can see it's already getting rid of a bunch of the stuff here. And then just a little bit of sidechain to pump things up. And then what I did, it's kind of an arrangement thing. So in some bits, there's like, it sounds as it is. And then on the second half, you can see here, I added in this additional loop here. So let's just go ahead and focus on that. Bring up the volume for you. So it's a bit more subtle, and it's a little bit more of an arrangement trick. So you can see here, if we zoom out, the idea is like a couple bars is without that, and then the next couple bars come in and add this additional layer. So just kind of changing this track over time, adding and decreasing energy, keeping things interesting. So a bit of an arrangement thing there, but then other than that, just found some cool sounds. Standard channel strip stuff. You can see it's just like I didn't even adjust it. It's nice to have it set up so that when you add a new track, it's automatically removing the lows and adding some sidechain. That way you don't have to do those things every time. But yeah, that's a look at the overall drums. I will go over this in the mixing video, but here's a quick look at what we got going on for the overall drum bus processing. Running into some K-clip, just kind of controlling the dynamics, adding in some parallel processing here, parallel compression, fattening things up, tightening things up. Same thing, idea with running through a saturator, fattening things up, making things a bit more cohesive. The idea is to run all the tracks through similar processing. It kind of creates a vibe and ties things together a little bit. And then one last K-clip, just kind of controlling the dynamic range a little bit. I will go into that in a future video. All right. So when it comes to the bass, I think one of the things I want to mention right off the bat is if you're going to be doing this, what I'd actually recommend is that you first find like a really cool sample, or basically like if you listen to the track, like that vocal and that like the instrumental behind it, it's clearly a track that already exists, and it's probably a stronger idea to first find that cool vocal and song that you want to work on and create your bass line to that. The way I did it is I was basically just referencing this song, the Bonito track. So it's a little bit of a different way to do it. I would recommend you do it the way I just mentioned, because that way you're going to be making it so the bass line is like playing against the original track in a lot better and more cohesive way. But with that out of the way, let's jump into this. So first things first, main thing is having the track in here as a reference. So I have Dennis Cruz's song Bonito, and I've set up so that it's turned off and the S key or the solo key is mapped to the S key on my keyboard. So I can flick back and forth as I'm like setting volumes, picking the right notes, and picking the right sounds for the bass here. So first things first, let's take a look at the notes for this one. And I'm going to turn off all the layers. So we're starting with the first layer that I added in, which was this sub. So let's first take a look at the MIDI. And listen back to the original. So similar, the idea is to get a similar vibe, but not to fully rip it off, so this way I can like slowly turn this into an actual track that I can release. I recommend you do the same thing. This way you're kind of copying the character, like kind of the vibe and the quality of the reference track, but then making your own original decision so you can actually do something with the track. That said, when it comes to the bass, the way I usually like to start things off is by focusing on just the sub and having the sub on a separate layer. This way, as you're picking the notes, it's very similar to using like a piano or a guitar. Very simple sound. There's not crazy sound design going on. You can focus on just making sure the notes are right, everything's in key, and you like the pattern that you've come up with. That said, let's have a quick look at this. So what I use is just like this little rack that I've developed for myself. This will be available in the project files, of course. It's just operator doing basic sine wave. A solid sub is usually just pretty much just a sine wave. And with the option to add in some saturation and drive to add some character to the sub, as well as make it so you can hear it a bit more in like laptop speakers and that kind of stuff. Other than that, we're doing a little bit of, I also have a 1-knob sidechain in here. So this is using the Ableton Shaper device from Macro Live, and it's just doing kind of a pumping effect to quarter notes. This way you don't have to route like a compressor to the kick drum every time and all that. It's just one knob, you dial it into taste and you're done. And then other than that, a little bit of EQ. So I have this frequency here, dropping a little bit here with this scoop over here. And then we also have an auto filter. We're removing a bunch of the high end to kind of make room for the next layer that we're going to go into. So once the sub is set up nicely, the next thing I like to do is add in like a mid bass layer to give it that character, and it's on a separate track, so that way you can just focus on the sound design of that character without worrying about any choice that you're making messing up the low end, because the sub track is going to take care of that, and that's its goal. It's just doing its thing, right? So let's add that in and have a listen to that. So it's subtle, so I'm also going to solo it so you can hear what we're listening for. So what I went for here for this sound is an upright bass sound, but before we get into that, I should mention the notes. So as you can see here, there's no MIDI here. So what I like to do is I have the sub track here playing the actual MIDI notes, and then on the additional mid bass layer, what I do is over here, this is normally set to all ends. When it's set to all ends, it's going to look for the MIDI and play the MIDI notes on that track. If you then instead change it to say subs like I have, that means the MIDI here is going to be automatically routed into this track. This way, if you make any changes throughout like the production of your song, you change up the bass line or anything like that, you're not having to copy and paste it over multiple tracks and that kind of messy, annoying stuff. And then to counteract the idea that like, say the notes that sound good for the sub, the octave that you're playing might be good for the sub, but maybe not good for the mid bass, I always make sure that there's this pitch device. So you can see here, I had to increase this MIDI notes up by 2 octaves or 24 semitones in order for the mid bass to sound good. This way you don't have to like copy and paste over the MIDI and then move it up a couple octaves. You can just use this little Ableton device to make it all seamless. Then other than that, I just looked through like the Ableton like browser here to find like an upright bass sound. That's kind of what I was hearing, kind of that kind of vibe in the original track. And so found something here, just dropped it in, and it's just changing the notes as it plays. It's out of C, so it's all good to go. And then a little bit of processing. Main thing here, when you're doing mid-bass processing, you're going to want to make sure you're removing a bunch of the low. This way it's not clashing with the sub, and the sub is doing its thing, can shine in all its glory without any like frequency overlapping and things getting too muddy. And then other than that, I'm bringing things, kind of removing a bunch of the highs, just to kind of mix it in a bit, make it so it's not like the bass is, if you listen to the main track, the bass is pretty subtle. It's almost mostly sub-bassy. So the idea is just to add some character here. Then other than that, running into this one knob width plugin, which is just a free plugin called Wider. It's by Polyverse. And then I've just mapped like the main knobs here so that I can just add a little bit of width with one knob instead of having to open up the plugin and any of that stuff. I can just quickly adjust it, mostly using ears instead of eyes, which is nice. And just doing a little bit of width, so that way the sub is in the center taking care of all the low end, and then this mid bass is slightly doing more of a stereo sound, so it's sounding fuller, and then also it's leaving space in the middle for that sub. Other than that, we're running into the one knob sidechain, which I also have as a separate rack, and this is what it looks like. This is what was built into that B sub one earlier. It's just a Max for Live shaper device running to quarter notes, because the kick's always just doing usually quarter notes anyways, and then just ducking volume. So that way, yeah, no weird compressor routing or anything like that. Just dial it into taste and move on, which is my style of doing things. And then the same thing, we have Ableton Saturator here, bringing in some saturation to kind of add additional frequency, so it's kind of filling out the sound, and also saturation can help add some vibe and character, in my opinion, as well. Other than that, main thing is volume, so just dialing it into taste and also kind of flicking back and forth, kind of trying to listen to that mid-bass top end of that track. With that said, there's this one additional thing. I'm not sure 100% why I added this to the bass group, but let's have a look and listen to what this is. Bring up the volume, or even solo for a second. Actually, it's pretty cool. So let's listen to it with the mid bass layer. So it's kind of like a upright bass sound that I've just chopped up a bit. In the, like, isolated it sounds cool, but I would say like in the mix it's pretty subtle. Like, see if you can hear it. In a second. Here. At the end of each phrase, or each bar. Kind of adds this like rolling sound to me, and then you can really hear it at the end right here, that kind of like little fill. Just found something cool on Splice, basically. If you listen to the reference track, there's definitely like kind of a live vibiness to the bass. So I wanted to add in something to kind of get that in there. Definitely more subtle, I would say, in the way that I'm doing it, but this is how I did it, so I'll show you what I did. Basically just cut up the parts in the sample that I liked, chopped it up, threw it in here, and then very similar moves. So I'm removing a bunch of the lows so that it's not interfering with the sub and the kick are taking care of that. Then some one knob sidechain for that pumping effect, and again, cutting it out so that the kick is really coming through nicely. A little bit of Ableton saturation to fill out the sound a little bit, and then a little bit of this one knob width plugin to make this sound a bit more stereo and full, and making room so the sub is taking care of most of the center. So that, I would say, is a pretty solid look at the bass for this one. All right. So when it comes to the synths and vocals for this kind of cool Latin house sound, one thing I want to mention right off the bat is when I was building this out, I was building it out against the track Dennis Cruz Bonito here. And honestly, my recommendation is when you're approaching the synths and vocals for this kind of style of music, I would go and find like a cool song that you want to flip, or find like really catchy vocals and instrumental parts first, and then build the rest of the song around that. Because then or else, like when I was doing this, by the time I got to the vocals, I had a hard time finding some vocals that fit really nicely and worked with the rest of the instrumental that I built. So that's something I would recommend that you do. But with that said, there was a little hint there to one of the big keys of the 80-20 rule here, which is to have a reference track in here. So I have Dennis Cruz's song Bonito in here, and I've set it up so that it's off, but I've set it so when I hit the S key on my keyboard, it's going to solo the track. So you can flick back and forth. To pick the right sounds, make sure you're playing the right notes, and to set the right volume. So that's going to be the main thing. So let's go over this one by one. So the first thing that I added was this little right here. Little stab. So if we listen to the rain track, they're using something a little different. I'm going to go maybe over here. I think we might be able to find it. That there. Ding. Ding. That thing there is kind of what I was trying to emulate there. So a little bit of a different sound. I went for more of like a synth sound, where the original is definitely something like maybe some kind of like horn or something like that. And basically you can have a look here. I just chose to find a sample on Splice. Just look something up in like a stab in the same key. And the only thing that I'm doing that's, I guess, kind of interesting is you'll notice that I'm kind of chopping that slice a little different. So it's like opening up more and more as the track or as the phrase continues, which just adds some kind of movement and some kind of change over time, which is really important with any kind of house music because it's a little loopy. So it's good to have some kind of movement and change happening. In terms of any processing, running into the standard channel strip that I usually go through. So we're removing a bunch of the lows here to make space for the kick and the bass to actually shine through. And a little bit of high shelving here to remove some of the highs and have it mix into the rest of the sound a little bit. What I'm then running into is this Sound Toys effect rack using Pan-Man. I think it was on the default setting. I just played around with the knobs a little bit. Just kind of moves that sound a little bit in the stereo field, which also, again, creates some movement and some interest. Then we're running into this one knob transient designer, or transient shaper, which is this free kilohertz one. All I've done is just mapped the crucial knobs to an Ableton rack. That way I don't have to open up the VST every time and all that. And so I'm driving up the attack a bit, so it's increasing the punch of the transient, that kind of like stab part of it, and then tightening up the sustain, so it's not, the sound isn't going out as long, it's getting cut short a little bit, which kind of tightens up the sound a little bit. Then running into this sidechain and saturation rack that I have, so we're doing a little bit of sidechain. It's like that kind of pumping, vibey kind of sound, and also leaves room for the kick to really come through. I set it up with this one knob kind of shaper into quarter notes, because quarter notes is what the kick's usually playing, and then running that into a gain utility device. So it's a simple way to do it so that you don't have to like map compressors and stuff like that to kicks, and just dial in the one knob to taste, and then you move on. Same thing with Ableton saturation here. It's just one knob, bringing it up about 6 decibels. It's adding this extra saturation and harmonics, which is kind of filling up the sound a little bit. And then we're moving into this one knob width plugin, which is this free one from Polyverse called the Wider. Same idea as before, mapping these knobs so it's just faster and easier. So this is just making that sound a little bit more stereo, moving it to the left and right a little bit, keeping the space in the middle for the more important things like vocals that we're going to get to in a bit. Then other than that, I am running into a compressor. I just wanted to even out the sound a little bit. So we're at a 4:1 ratio, a pretty fast attack, and I just have to release the auto. And then we're going for about 4 to 5 decibels of gain reduction. Just trying to tighten up that sound so it's a lot more consistent and easier to work with. Cool, and so we'll move on. That's kind of one of the first sounds there. And also, yeah, if you want to grab the project files for this, there's a link in the description. This channel strip, all these cool little racks and knobs and stuff are in there for you. So then the next sound I added was this one. Let's have a look and a listen. So I don't think the sound is as much in the original tune. It's just something that I wanted to add in there, and like I usually mention in these videos, I feel like the best strategy is to build up against a reference track so you're working against something super high quality, but then to start making different creative decisions as you go so that you're not just making carbon copies of tracks. You're actually creating something that you can release as an original track or a bootleg or something like that. So this is just a kind of a more chord, almost pad-ish sound that I like to add here. Kind of adds a bit more of a deep vibe to it, pushes it away from the Latin vibe a bit, but that's kind of what I was going for. Just found some cool sound on Splice, chopped it up, cut it into it. I think it's like a much larger loop, which I wasn't into. Just grabbed a bit that I liked and chopped it up. Then in terms of any processing, running it into this Shaper Box plugin here. Some, I don't know, interesting preset I found. I definitely didn't create that, I'm not gonna lie. And then for some reason I'm running into 2 Shaper Boxes. A gated sequence one. I guess it's making that kind of like jittery sound. I am automating the mix of it, so it's kind of coming in and out, which is another cool thing to do to kind of create that movement and detail. And then we're running into the standard channel strip, so it's removing some of the lows to make room for the kick and the bass. Some side chains, so it's making room for the kick and giving that pumping vibe, and a little bit of saturation to fill out the sound a little bit. Then the next thing we have is this. Listen to it. This is a drum loop that I probably should have put in the drum group, but for whatever reason, I put it in the melodic group. I think I just found what I was going for was just trying to add more energy to the track with additional drums. This definitely should be in the drum group, but it is what it is. Just cutting out some of the lows, a little bit of sidechain so it's pumping, and then that's it. And we can move into some of the more interesting stuff. So this is what I was talking about when I was saying, like, you should probably start with like the sample or the vocals that you want to work with first and build everything around it. Because then once I got to the point where I was trying to add in, like, if you listen, there's vocals, and behind the vocals, little guitars and cool like Latin vibe stuff. My understanding, this sound is very similar to like a group called the Buena Vista Social Club, which my understanding the style of music is called son. So it's very cool, kind of like that chill and like Latin kind of vibe. So when you build the track the way I did, then you're trying to shoehorn that in after, which gets a little difficult. So what I found was this song called Mama Sissoko, and the song is called Safia 2. And I was basically just looking up songs on YouTube and found something and then ripped it over. And so anyways, let's listen to that. Bring up the volume for you. And so, actually, I feel like that sounds cool. I feel like it should probably be louder, but so that's a big part of this Latin sound, is like finding a cool sample that has that vibe already in there, so you're not programming in like guitars or anything. That's probably too crazy. I think the sample-based route is the best. So the way I did this was I just found this song, I dropped it into a program called lalal.ai. So that helped me separate the instrument from the vocal, which you can see over here that we'll be getting into in a second. Found a good spot, and then chopped it, did a little bit of, I think a little tiny bit of like adjusting the warp markers to make sure it's on time and all that, and then just dropped it in there. And then in terms of any processing, there's this little bit of the A1 trigger gate, which is a free plugin, which is really good for getting that cool like kind of stuttery house sound. And then I have an LFO mapped to the mix of it, so that over time it's adjusting how much of that stutter sound is coming in and out. Again, trying to create some movement. Then we're running into the standard channel shift. So we're moving a bunch of the lows, shelving some of the highs, some one-off side chain, some bit of saturation, and a bit of width to move it to the left and right. And next up, we have the vocals. So let me jump to a spot in the arrangement where there's a good chunk of vocals. Maybe here. And let's turn it on, have a look and listen. Let's start from the beginning. I'll listen to that. I'm gonna turn it off because double vocals, me and that can get a little hard to hear. So basically that is the vocal from this guitar bit kind of that you can hear in the background. In my opinion, when this stuff's not in, the extra stuff that I added really takes away from the Latin vibe. Once this is in, it sounds a lot more of that Latin house vibe. So basically, yeah, I split it up with the vocals so that I have control over the vocals versus the instrumental. Main thing is listening to that. Flicking back and forth, trying to get the vocals in there at a similar volume. That's really volumes are one of the most important things, particularly against a reference track. So with that said, yeah, just did a little bit of like, I think I might have did some warping. Didn't look like I had to actually, that's great. And then, because actually the song was in the same BPM, so that made things a little easier. In terms of any processing, I'm running into this thing that my buddy John Alpine showed me, which is really cool. It's an LFO mapped to the pitch of this Nectar device, which makes it so that over time that vocal is like getting slightly pitched up and down, which is cool, adds some waviness and some movement. Then we're just removing a bunch of the lows, removing some of the highs, a bit of one-off sidechain, and a little bit of one-off saturation. And that's really a look at the synths and the vocals for this one. I'd say main things is when you're building out your tracks like this, I'd find the song you want to flip first, build around that. That's super important. And if there was one other thing that I could have added to this that I wish I did, which would have been more kind of like horns. There's definitely like sick horns, basically. But the track that I was flipping didn't really have too much of that, so couldn't put it in there. But yeah, think that's a pretty good look at that. All right. So when it comes to the mix for this one, there's 3 things I want to go over. First is the mix as you go strategy, then the bus processing, and then the mastering. So one of the first things is to get really quick sounding songs that are mixed really well and sound great. Best thing you can do is have a reference track in your track. So in this example, I actually have Dennis Cruz's song Bonito in here. It's turned off and I mapped the S key on my keyboard so I can flick back and forth like that. And so this way, as you're building out your track, you can really pay attention to, really the main thing here is to set the right volumes. The volumes is going to get you really 80% of the way there. Volumes and selecting the right sounds as you're building out the track. So let's jump over into a portion of the song here. And so if we flick back and forth, let's listen to the kick first, and then let's start kick. Similar sound, similar volumes. So then it's just super easy. That way you're just ripping through, setting the right volumes as you're going through it. There is some processing that I usually do, so I'll kind of show you what that usually looks like. It usually looks something like this. So everything other than this compressor. So actually, let me find an even better example. It's usually something like this. So this is the standard channel strip that I have in each one of my tracks. So when I create a new audio track or a new MIDI track, it automatically is set up like this. And so, for example, so if I go down here and press insert new audio track, you see automatically this is set up. So this way, what I can easily do is automatically, I'm cutting away anything under 200 hertz. This is usually the move I'll do, so that way it's removing any of the low end in a new track as you add it, and making sure that that low end is mostly being taken care of by the kick and the bass. And those are the most important elements really for the low end. You don't really need like guitars and vocals to be that low. If it'll just kind of muddy up the frequencies, and too much overlapping frequencies will create mud and make it sound kind of crappy. So really easy thing you can do is set up your EQ when you automatically do any track to automatically be doing the move that you want to make. And maybe if it's like you want to do something like this each time too, you can set up the default by right clicking and saying save as default preset. That way every time you open up an EQ8, it'll also set it up like this. So I usually like to have it set up where it's removing a bunch of the lows and then having a high shelf filter here, which can be a more of a natural way to remove some of the high end on tracks when compared to a traditional low pass filter like this, which can sound cool and creative also sometimes, but might sound maybe too much at certain points. Then the next thing I usually like to run into when doing the mix as you go thing. So first thing, set the volumes, then I'll quickly run through this channel strip. If it needs transient shaping, I have this kilohertz transient shaper here, which is completely free. I've just mapped the main knobs here in Ableton. This way I can quickly adjust the attack of the transient, so make it a little bit more punchier, or bring down the sustain a bit, which will tighten up the sound. So those are kind of very, very common moves that I'm doing, trying to tighten up sound, so I'm trying to mix it in with the rest of the elements a bit more. Then the next thing I'll usually look to is sidechain. So the way I've set up the sidechain here is I use using this shaper on like a LFO tool kind of shape. It's going at quarter notes, which is usually what the kick is doing, and then it's just ducking the volume. So instead of having to like route like a compressor to a kick all the time, since the kick's usually just doing quarter notes anyways, this way you can just do a one knob to taste, dial it in, and then bring it back a little bit. So a lot simpler. You're using your ears more than your eyes a little bit, and it's just faster. Then other than that, next thing I might look to is some of the sidechains can sometimes bring the volume down a little bit. And so something I've been doing lately is I like to bring the volume back in with saturation, and maybe overdo it a little bit and then have to adjust the volume on the main channel. But the idea with saturation here is it's adding additional harmonics, kind of adding some additional grit to the sound as well. The main thing is can make it sound a bit fuller and bigger. So the idea is to make some small moves here to fill out that sound a little bit. And then lastly, there's one knob width plugin, which is a free one from Polyverse called Wider. And again, just mapped the knobs here. And that way, with one knob, you can adjust the width, which is pushing it to the left and right, making it a bit more stereo. And also can have the effect of making it so that the center, there's less elements taking up the center, so that things like vocals and those kind of things can really shine through. So that's kind of a look at the mix as you go strategy. The idea is to first select the right sound as you're building out the the track, flicking back and forth between the reference track and what you're building to make sure you have the right sound, then getting that volume correct. And then a little cherry on top is like making small adjustments to the EQ so that it's not taking up too many frequencies and leaving space for the other instruments, adjusting the transient a little bit, transient shaping a little bit so you can tighten up the sound, help mix it in a little bit. Same thing with sidechain, adds that pumping, grooving, saturation fills it out, and with small moves that you can see here that super easy to do, especially when the channel strip is all set up like this, that we can really quickly adjust these things and move on to the next track so that you're mixing as you go. So with that said, that's kind of the concept. I'll usually go from drums to bass to melodic elements and then add in additional effects. And that way, by the time the track's built out, it already has like a light mix to it. So then once, like, you can do some kind of continue referencing and adjusting and all that kind of stuff. But usually what I'll do after that is do a bit of group processing. I don't always do this, but a bit of this I've been doing a lot lately. So for example, let's have a look at the drums. What I've been doing lately is running into a K clip. So looking for around, nothing too crazy in the amount clip department, under a decibel or so. So in this case, I might drive this up a little bit. Just getting a little bit, cutting off some of the tops here, and having it set so that the in and the out are linked, so that the volumes that you've been working on for, say, like the drums for the last half an hour or an hour, whatever you've been doing, don't get messed up by you just adding or removing a bunch of volume on the group level. This way, you're just driving it up into the orchestral, you're getting some amount clipped, but the volumes that you're hearing are the same because you've linked them. So that's usually what I'll do first. Then I've been running it into this bass punch in parallel preset, which is like an aggressive amount of compression, but it's dialed in. So it's at a 16% dry and wet. And the idea here is it's New York style compression where it's really intense settings, but you dial it in to taste, and it can fill up the sound a little bit, even out things a little bit. That's the idea. And then the saturation, running everything through a bit of saturation, again doing it parallel, so just bringing in a little bit of taste. And a cool aspect of these things is it does add something called glue that you might have heard before, and basically that can happen when you run like all these individual like elements. If we were to add like a compressor to each and every single one, then that individual element is running into the compressor by itself. But when you run everything in totality into the same compressor, since it's like all going through the same thing and all getting the same amount of compression applied to it, and they're kind of working together to influence the compressor, you can kind of get some cohesion and some glue. Same thing with saturation. Then the last thing I'm running is a K clip again. Again, looking for about a decibel clip using the link function here. And this is going to just chop off a bit of the transients up at the top and reduce a bit of the dynamic range. So the idea is by having like a clipper, or even if you wanted to use like a limiter on the group processing, you're controlling the dynamic range in like a small movement like this. We're not doing like 5 decibels clipped or anything. So it's small amounts throughout the project, so that when we get to mastering, those clippers and limiters on the master aren't working as hard. So let's have a move on over to the bass. You'll see here it's a very similar kind of move. So running into a K clip, it looks like nothing's being clipped on the first one. Then let's move over, same bass punch and parallel preset, just dialed in even less. Same thing with the saturation, it's dialed even less. And then finally a K clip at the end, going for about a decibel clipped as well. And this one you can see I didn't link them. And I'm guessing as I was building up the bass and continuing to reference it, I decided that the bass overall needed more volume, and so I made that change at the K clip on the bus processing kind of processing level. Then we're running into the melodic stuff. So again, we're going to a K clip right off the bat, controlling the volume. This one's going, okay, there gets us some spiky parts, a lot more clipped here. And then we're running into the bass parallel preset again, just dialing it in. Running into OTT as well with the high end reduced a bit, and like the amount very, very light. Just OTT is cool. It can add like a kind of more present in your face kind of sound. And then saturation again, very similar, a little bit more going on there. And then finally we're going to the last clipper. There's quite a lot of clipping going on in this one. And then I think that's a good look. The effects group, I usually just throw maybe one clipper on there, try to get something going on there, but there's not effects happening throughout the whole track. Cool. So I think that's a good look at the bus processing. So then the last thing that we're going to go over here is the mastering. So I'm going to try to show you this. Like I've been mentioning in these videos, I'm using a MacBook Air, so it could drive up the CPU usage. And also, like, I'm trying to control running this into the video recording software without it sounding too distorted and hitting like the limiting on that software. So bear with me as I go through this. So usually the first thing I have is this like a K clip on here. I'm usually trying to aim for about like a decibel clips or even less. So that way we're reducing the signal before going into the mastering chain. So let me just turn everything off and kind of run you through this. Cool. So usually the first thing I like to do is set this glue compressor. So I usually, as I'm mixing everything, I'm not doing like everything at -6. I'm actually just kind of trying to go to 0 for the most part. So that's why I like to go into a clipper first to make sure that I'm controlling the volume and it's not like going over 0 and starting to sound all crappy. And then in addition to that, I'm using this. I've been using a utility to adjust the gain, but this time I decided to use a clipper to do it. And the main reason is over here on the glue compressor, I have these settings here, and the idea is to just get a light amount of compression to kind of glue everything together a little bit, control the dynamic range a little bit, but aiming for like subtlety here. I don't want to overdo it and make it sound all like squashed and crappy. But when you're mixing so loud like this, like you're running into 0 like that, like if I turn this K clip off, the volume is now going a bit more than I'd like. It actually still sounds pretty great, to be honest, but at least my ears. But you see there's nowhere else to go with the threshold. So that's why I introduced something at the beginning, and that's how I use it to like dial the volume back. So I'm getting the amount of gain reduction that I'm looking for here. Other than that, also with this glue compressor, cool trick is to bring up the EQ and bring the frequency up, because that way, with it off, you can see here the compressor's reacting way more because the kick is like so loud and coming in here and smashing it. So if you go like this and dial it back, the kick is going to influence the compressor less. Kick and bass is going to influence the compressor less, and it creates like less of a overly compressed crappy sound basically. So that's that. Then running into this Golfos master with these like pretty light settings, 13% on recover, 13% on chain. The brighten is touched down a little bit, and bringing this back because removing the processing on the high end, because sometimes it can overdo it. This is a really subtle plugin. Like I wonder if you can even hear the difference. But I do feel like, because it's like some kind of AI smart crap, so it can help tame, or not tame, I don't want to use the same word as this, but it can help smooth out any crappiness in your mixing abilities and kind of just make things sound a little bit nicer. Then I run into the final bit of clipping here, clipping and limiting. I learned this from my buddy Zach Adams, so shout out to Zach. But the first move is to run into a Pro L2 with the transparent style, aiming for about a decibel of gain reduction with the true peak limiting off. And the output set to -1. So the idea is trying to do a little bit of clipping or limiting here. Not too much. Each device is working just a little bit, never overdoing it, so it doesn't get to sound too bad or overly distorted or anything like that. So then running into another K clip, aiming for about a decibel of amount clipped, and making sure that the ceiling is also again dropping it by a decibel. And then we go into the final limiter, and we're going for again about a decibel clipped. This time I usually switch between modern or aggressive, so it's adding a little bit of like a character to it as well, with the true peak limiting on. And yeah, so all in all, this one, and the output at 0.2, 0.3 is good. And so we're around -8. If we added in the vocals and moved to another part in the song, it's probably going a little bit closer to -8. Right now it looks like we're hovering around like -8.5 and -9, which is pretty good. That's a decent amount of volume, so pretty happy with that. Yeah, that is a pretty solid look here at the mixing and mastering for this one. So we'll do a quick overview of the 80-20 rule. That way you can figure out how to do this too, because when you do the mix as you go, and then you just do the bus processing and the mastering like this, it really only takes like 15 minutes or so to finish off the track, which is, I think, pretty nice. But before we get into that 80-20 rule, I want to mention that this video is sponsored by our good friends over at Rocket Powered Sounds. The kick and the snare in the drums that we were using here was actually from one of their really cool sample packs called the Ultimate Sample Pack, which is a pretty massive sample pack that's filled with over 1,000 different iconic sounds. And as a special bonus for being a viewer of the channel, you can get a 30% off of that Ultimate Sample Pack. Just visit the link that's on screen now or in the description, and be sure to use the coupon code ULTIMATEBESTFRIENDS to get that 30% off. Thank you again to Rocket Powered Sounds for hooking up our community here. And with that said, let's jump back into the 80-20 rule for mixing for this vid. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now, and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later, and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.